We got one more story left on the day, and this is a story I was excited to talk to you, Pasta, about. I had not followed the Venezuela election very closely because my baby was born right as this story was breaking, and I was on sort of a modified paternity leave, which was very convenient because if I'm being honest, we planned the pregnancy around the Venezuela vote. You know, Amanda in mid-November, she told me she was ovulating. I'm like, all right, let's go make this happen now because there's a coup in Venezuela. It's going to happen in July, and I don't really feel like talking about it. So let's make this happen now. So I'll go on leave right as it happens, and I will just sit back and let my co-host take whatever incoming there is to take. So I plan that perfectly, but now that I have Pasta here, who actually goes to these countries and evaluates these things, I do want to get your perspective on this because the Washington Post reports the UN experts say Venezuela election results lack basic transparency. A UN panel of electoral experts said in a new report that Venezuela's National Electoral Authority fell short of following through on basic transparency and integrity measures that are essential to holding credible elections. The panel of 4 experts, one of the few independent groups invited to Venezuela on the occasion of the July 28th vote — my kid was born the day before. See how precisely I planned that? It was perfect. Work like a charm. Released a report on Tuesday that was not initially expected to be made public. In it, the UN experts wrote that the government's decision to announce an election outcome without publicizing its details has no precedent in contemporary democratic elections. This had a negative impact on confidence in the outcome announced by the National Electoral Council among a large part of the Venezuelan electorate, the report's authors wrote. The report is the latest independent assessment of a presidential election outcome that has been discredited by the United States, and other nations who say the evidence clearly shows a victory for the country's opposition. The National Electoral Council declared President Nicolas Maduro the winner of the election with 51% of the vote, but refused to release any of the precinct-level results of the election, despite promising and implementing a workflow to do so. The opposition, meanwhile, collected and publicized printouts from voting stations showing that opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez won more than twice as many votes as Maduro. The UN panel of experts said it reviewed a small, publicly available sample of those documents. The printed receipts at polling stations featured QR codes and signatures of officials and agents, security features that the panel said appear to be very difficult to be fabricated. The panel, which was not a formal observation mission, was expected to only report internally to the UN Secretary General with recommendations for future improvements. It was invited to observe the vote by Venezuela's Electoral Council as part of an electoral agreement last year between the country's government and its opposition, a deal supported with temporary sanctions relief from the United States. The actual election day was logistically well organized, the panel said, and the Electoral Council was able to detect and quickly resolve a large majority of small technical glitches that were reported during the day. According to the report, the country's electronic results transmission abruptly stopped in the hours after polls closed, a delay that the Electoral Council blamed on a terrorist cyber attack, but the panel was not able to independently verify the presence of external attacks because the Electoral Council postponed and later canceled 3 post-electoral audits, including on the communication system. Final slide here. The Atlanta-based Carter Center, which also sent a group of observers to Venezuela's election, previously said the vote did not meet international standards of electoral integrity and cannot be considered democratic. Jenny Lincoln, head of the Carter Center's mission in Venezuela, has cast doubt over the possibility of an internet hacking disruption. Hours before the UN report was released, Jorge Rodriguez, head of the government-controlled National Assembly, described the UN panel as filled with trash and criticized its decision to make the report public. He proposed a change in the electoral law to ban international observers in future elections. Why do they have to come? He asked. And so I just want to say right at the outset, my position on this is the same as the activists at the People's Forum and stuff. Hands off Venezuela. This election took place under siege. An election that takes place under siege is a rigged election by definition, rigged by the United States, who seeks to overthrow the government of Venezuela. That being said, claims about the vote count are a different question. To me, they are a relatively unimportant question compared to the most important question, which is that if there were shenanigans, it was because the election was being held under siege and under threat of prolonged crippling sanctions against the people, which are intended to stir unrest against Maduro's government. That being said, Pasta, you travel to these countries to observe these processes. I understand you tried to go to Venezuela, but were not able to go. So do you want to just take that from wherever you want?
Yeah, I was stuck in Nicaragua for an extra 6 days. So I was there for 12 days instead of 6. Supposed to go to Venezuela. Um, those same people that we agree with, that you said you kind of agree with over there, People's Forum, um, all the Roy Singham funded groups, PSL and stuff, for the reasons why me and Fiorella were kept out, right? So they didn't let us go over there. But we had members and friends on the ground that we've been and observed elections in other countries before. So we had firsthand information of what was going on, how these processes work, and everything like that. Now, let me just point out right now that when we do go to these countries, when I go to these countries, we're not going there to push communism or capitalism or socialism. We're only there to push national sovereignty, right? We take these elections serious. In other words, we're going to scrutinize the system up and down. We're going to give you our best assessment, give it a grade as far as all the things that matter, transparency, chain of custody, the actual process itself. And we're going to tell you where the areas where it could be cheated or what could happen and whatnot. So listen, I have a very good idea of what's going on. It seems when you were reading this article here, and this is the same article I read last night, that their complaints or their objections were kind of planned out beforehand. What they're talking about, this terrorist cyber attack, this is something we were following very closely, is that the CNE didn't report their results right away because they didn't have the ability to, that their website had been hacked or jammed or whatnot. And that's the area which they're kind of just, they're trying to throw the dart and saying, look, these guys were not honest about their system. They were put up results before they even put up their homework. So that is enough to manufacture consent to get in there and say these elections are fraudulent. Right? They're not talking about anything about the objections that were put up as far as the opposition and what they brought to the table and their proof. Because when they went back and they eventually did their audit and their count, they showed that their system was true and their results are actually real. Now, as far as transparency is concerned, these are simple DRE machines, direct recording electronic devices, and I see a lot of people in your chat throwing the word out. Dominion chooses because, a lot of Trump people right there, they're trying to blame Dominion for the problems. Let me say this
I'm
much.
surprised that Trump people still watch our show. I'm glad they do, but they're a little they're a little mad at me now. But they'll get over it.
They should be. I'd be mad at you too. But that's beside the point. It's the way they have to look at these machines. They have to look at it the same way you look at a gun. Right? That's the way these people need to look at it. It's not the gun that's the problem. It's the person using the gun, right? That's the dangerous entity. That's what they always argue of pro-Second Amendment people. It's like, law-abiding citizens should be able to use the gun. The same goes as the machines, right? It's not the machine itself. It's not Dominion. It's not ES&S. It's not Smartmatic, which are the three major companies that I just mentioned with voting machines. Some of the voting machines they have are actual voting machines themselves. Some are tabulation machines. So we have to understand the difference between the machines, how they're used, and the people using them. In Venezuela, they use a simple DRE machine, which is almost like a cash register. It's called a direct recorded electronic device. You press on the screen. However, a paper trail is created. So then they have a print of a paper trail. They take that over to a separate box. This is all done within the purview of the people. It's all public, so everything can be recorded, everything can be counted, everything can be tracked, and they put that in a ballot box right over there. At the end of the election, they're then going to audit 54% of the boxes. This is the area where I'd like to see them get to 100%, do 100% hand count. But they do 54% of a random audit. It's all public. They match the numbers to the machines. If there was cheating, Keaton, it would have been caught in real time. That's what this system is set up to be. Jimmy Carter said years ago, despite what the Carter Center says now, right? And really, to tell you the truth, if you're the opposition, you should probably go with what the Carter Center said. They're giving you an actual way of protesting that is pre-election, meaning they left the number one candidate off the ballot. Did they have a right to do that? Did the CNE then put their foot on the scale for Maduro and his government by giving him extra time to campaign or extra, radio time or TV time or whatnot? That's the area where you would question things. Also, the Venezuelans voting abroad. There's supposedly 7 million outside Venezuela right now, and only 500,000 of them could vote, right? You could talk about those things and protest that. And if the opposition really thought they would win the election, they would have called for a full hand count audit during the election beforehand. And they would have said that. And you would have saw pictures of actual tapes on doors in which you would have said, I can flag this machine. Something's not right. We want this machine looked at. We want an audit of this machine. We saw none of that. We saw none of that in Brazil. We saw none of that in Colombia. We saw none of that now in Venezuela. So if I'm going to say that if I had to make a decision, even though I wasn't on the ground, but I had my team there from everything I saw, I would say that this process is one of the most transparent out there. And anybody in America shouldn't be wagging their finger at Venezuela and telling them they should have a transparent election when our elections have no transparency, no chain of custody. Theirs is damn near flawless. And any of those Trump people who are saying, those populist right people who are saying that Maduro is a dictator and he didn't win, if you ask them honestly, if you ask Donald Trump himself, if you ask Carrie Lake herself, would you rather have Venezuela's election system or the system we have here at home in the United States? They would tell you, if they were honest, answering truthfully, Keaton, they would take Venezuelan system every day of the week and twice on Sunday, because that's the day you're supposed to have an election. And this was a fair, clean, transparent election. One of the best ones. Maduro won. United States is just pissed off because they're using the old playbook of how they do things. You know what I'm saying? Manufacture consent. You don't need to have proof that it was cheated. You just have to plant that seed of a doubt that, that this election was cheated. So therefore you can, work up a regime change like they did. But it's not working because the people understand their election system way better than Americans understand their own election system, and they're going to stand by it and stand by the results. That's what's going on.
Okay, so that was a very thorough answer. And look, I agree there should be no finger wagging at Venezuela no matter what. I mean, no matter what. The only reason we have an interest in their election at all is because we want their oil. And
Exactly.
We want a puppet who's going to give it to us cheap. And if the opposition had their way, they might feel that a Western puppet will get the boot of sanctions off their neck. It'll also turn their country into a plantation for the United States, just like Cuba was a plantation for the United States before the Castro revolution. So yeah, I'm all for that. And that was a very thorough answer. I just want to ask as a question, not necessarily as a challenge, but this paragraph here: the National Electoral Council declared President Nicolas Maduro the winner of the election with 51% of the vote, but refused to release any of the precinct-level results of the election, despite promising and implementing a workflow to do so. Why did they renege on that? I just ask as a question.
That's the part where they're saying that they had a hack, that they couldn't report the results to the CNE website. Like I'm saying, that's why the fact that the UN brought this up tells me that they were going with this beforehand, that they knew they were going to use this. Once again, you don't have to prove that the election is unfair, right? Or it was rigged or cheated. You just have to plant that seed of doubt. And this is very broad when they say this, right? They're not telling you exactly what happened. And the CNE reported right away that they can't upload stuff to their website, that it's been hacked, that they're not allowed to do it. But they had everything in hand. They had all the receipts. And that's why when they eventually got to it and they got to the recount, the results were the same for Nicolas Maduro. He had won. They had all that information, but it seems like they had planned this beforehand, and they can use this to manufacture consent to try and say this election was unfair.
So do you take that there were so do you believe that there was a hack and that they're being honest in their statement that the reason they're not releasing those tablatures is because they were hacked?
I don't know if it was a hack or one of those. Zach Voorhees, right, who was the Google whistleblower at one point when he blew the whistle on Google. When Tulsi Gabbard's website got taken down, remember one of the biggest times when she was going after Kamala, she was fundraising like crazy.
Right.
What had happened, he explained, is that there's ways to trip the systems and there's ways of using AI and whatnot to crash a website. So I don't know if it was necessarily hacked, but it was definitely crashed. It was definitely disabled, so they couldn't put stuff there. And like I said, they had all the information right there. This election is meant to be caught if there's any fraud in real time. They had nothing to hide. And it seems to me that this was planted beforehand. Right away, they put out messages that they can't upload to their website. They can't, something's going on. It's hacked. They won't let us put it up there. But they knew they had all the receipts. So it almost seems as if this was planted or planned beforehand.
So
and
when you say they had all the receipts, who had all the receipts and where? And what were those receipts?
Here's the thing. After every single vote, right? Yep. When they close the polls, Keaton, in every single room with every single machine and every single ballot box, which is in the purview of the public, they take those results and they put them on the door. All you have to do is have one member at every single election site meaning you're a team member that can report into you, taking pictures of all the receipts on the doors and sending them back to your headquarters, right? So they knew they had everything there because these results are public. They put the results out in front of every single door. In other words, the counting process is done in front of the purview of the people, of the citizens. That's therefore it's really hard to cheat. So all that information is right there. Colombia, the same thing. We talked about this. They have the mess. I said, you should have at least 2 workers from your team. This is the party that was trying to take back power, right? Gustavo Petro. I said you should have 2 members from your team at each polling spot and take a picture of all the results that come out. Me and Fiorelli we were taking pictures of all the tapes to tell, hey, we're reporting the numbers. You can report it in real time. So they knew they had all the count beforehand when the polls closed. Like I said, the best attack against them, if you're the opposition, you should read what the Carter Center said, because they're pretty much saying that the election rigging took place before the election, not allowing the main candidate on the ballot, Corina Marina Machado, right? Not allowing Venezuelans abroad to vote. That's, a form of election fraud. That's where there
not
is a little bit of argument, not on the actual voting process itself.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that.
That make sense? I'm not doing a good job at this.
No, I think
too many people have questions.
No, it's okay. No, I mean, I think you are. I mean, it was a very thorough response. Like I said, I was lucky enough to have missed this because I was on leave when all this was happening. And honestly, like if I'm being totally honest, my take on this is that an election under siege is not a fair race, and the reason it's not a fair race is because it's under siege. And why is Venezuela under siege? Because they want to get top dollar for their resources, and we don't like that. And so we are the bad guys in this. Either way, which is why the question of the vote count is downstream of the larger demands, which is just hands off their country. And why is Anthony Blinken giving his opinion on an election in fucking Venezuela? Why? Yeah. He doesn't talk about the Paraguayan election. He doesn't talk. We talk about elections anywhere else in the world. We care about the elections in the countries with oil under the ground, and we do try and rig it against people who are going to protect their country's resources because we want South America to be a plantation for us. And to me, that's the whole question, and that's Russell's take on it too. I do have to stick up for my co-host here. That's his ultimate take on it as well. And so I think the details, and I'm glad you provided that information. I will look into it more now that I have a sort of basis to research it, because it's impossible to find those kinds of takes in any sort of print media that I can find. And so thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Well, they shouldn't have left us out, right? That was the problem, that they outsourced their list of people who can come in to those PSL members, those People's Forum, all the Roy Singham groups, and they made sure that we didn't get in there for whatever reason, and that's just a whole discussion in itself. But let me just say this much with the process. Just remember, there's a paper trail for every single vote. The chain of custody starts at the door. It's in front of the purview of the citizens. So, even that the points that you were making, which you and Russell were making, that, at the end of the day, it's a vote under siege. Our country, our foreign policy apparatus does want that oil. More importantly, we don't want that oil to fall into the hands of BRICS, all that oil and that gold.
Sure.
We don't want that to happen, at least from that point of view. And that is true. But for me, at the end of the day, I'm all about national sovereignty. Who do the people want? Who do they want to pick? And, at the end of the day, I've seen it plain and simple. This is one of the more transparent elections out there, one of the more transparent systems. If we had this system, Keaton, it'd be a lot different. Let's not also forget, they're voting for one person, one job, one president that day, not 50 other, not voting for dog catcher, or they've simplified the process for moments and times like this. because then they can show their homework and show that there's a reason why the majority of the people support the Chavistas. The same way in Nicaragua, while the majority of people support the Sandinistas, they put themselves on the side of the working class and the poor, full stop. And that's what it's all about. They understand that these countries want to come in, especially the United States, and take their resources and then take away their national sovereignty, and they're not going to let it happen.
Please clap.